Okay, good morning. It's cold in here, isn't it? I don't know what to do other than snuggle up the person next to you, but I'm sorry about the cold. My very warm thanks to Alan and the rest of the organisers of the conference for the invitation. I can't tell you what a privilege it is for me to be here. When I woke up this morning, and the first thing I did, I got out of bed in my hotel room, I opened the curtains, and I looked straight out on the Coogee beach. And if you've spent 17 years in the Midwest of the United States with no water and no mountains, you're happy when you wake up and look at Coogee Beach. So that was a thrill for me today. All right. A couple of days ago, I was talking to my son in the United States, and he was asking me, what are you going to be talking about? And I told him what I'm going to be talking about. And he said to me, that sounds vacuous. And so that was inspiring. And so I'm going to do my best not to be vacuous, but we'll see. So maybe that's a question at the end of the day. All right, so the topic we're going to be talking about is quality talk about text. And I'm looking at quality talk about text discussion to promote what we call high-level comprehension of text. So the first thing I want to do is explain a little bit about how I think about high-level comprehension. When people hear that word, high-level comprehension, we think of various things. Typically, people think of critical thinking, or a big one, critical literacy, argumentation, going beyond the text, going beyond the given, reasoning. Those are all things that we talk about when we hear the term high-level comprehension of text. And I'm fine with that. And if we were to put that all together, we'd probably come up with thinking about interrogating the text for the underlying assumptions, arguments, worldviews, or beliefs. If that would sort of capture that critical analytic stance towards the text. But I'm in the middle of writing a book with a colleague on the topic of quality talk about text. And over the years that I've been writing this book, I've come to appreciate that there's much more to high-level comprehension than just taking a critical analytic stance towards the text. And so sometimes what we care about with our students and with text is simply that they make personal connections to the text, that they appreciate the lived-through experience of reading it, that they might even savor the literary qualities of the text. In a way, that's high-level comprehension too. Sometimes, though, what we care about, particularly with informational text, is that students acquire the information from the text, they learn from it, and can apply it later on. So that's more of what Louise Rosenblatt would call an efferent stance towards the text. So all of those things, for me, constitute high-level comprehension. And if you put it all together, at its essence, all we're talking about is deep engagement with text. Deep engagement with text. So when I'm going to be using the term today, that's what I mean. Okay. When I was getting ready for this talk and thinking about what I could say, I kept on being reminded of something that Gordon Wells said almost 30 years ago. And Gordon Wells is a British educator, many of you will know, who does lots of research on language and literacy and learning. And 30 years ago, he said this: simply to increase the amount of talk in the classroom may not bring about significant improvement, either in language learning or in learning through language. More important than the quantity of talk, it seems to me, is its quality, the type of interaction to which it contributes, and the purposes that it serves in students' overall learning experiences. Now that was a prescient claim back then, almost 30 years ago. Fast forward to 2018, and basically what Gordon Wells said is captured now by what we think of as dialogic teaching. I know many of you have heard that term. Dialogic teaching means many things to many people. It's a term that's probably overused at the moment around the world. So let me tell you a little bit about how I think about it. When I think of the term dialogic teaching, I mostly associate that with the work of Robert Alexander at Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And he talks about dialogic teaching in these ways. First of all, he thinks of it as a general teaching approach where we're capitalizing on the power of talk to further students' thinking, learning, problem solving. And a key feature of dialogic teaching is that it involves choosing from a menu, a repertoire of different kinds of talk for different purposes, and to be a little bit strategic about the kinds of talk we use with our students, and this talk we provoke in our students, depending on the goals and the educational objectives that we have. Another key feature of dialogic teaching is giving students greater control over the flow of talk, greater agency in constructing their own knowledge and understanding. And finally, and this one comes from Martin, the Russian literary theorist, in dialogic teaching, where does meaning reside? Well, meaning resides in the interplay among different perspectives and ideas. And the idea is that when students have the opportunity to voice their different perspectives and ideas, those perspectives and ideas bump up against each other, they bump against each other, and in that interaction of those competing ideas, students are able to gain a deeper understanding of what the text is about. So, in the rest of my talk, I'm going to be picking up on a key theme that Gordon Wells talked about, and a key theme with dialogic teaching. And it's a theme that many people, I think, are starting to forget. And if we remember nothing else from this morning and my talk, please try to remember this is it. This is all. You can leave the talk right now if you like. This is the bottom line. Different talk for different purposes. Seems simple, but let me try and unpack it for you and explain what I think it means when we're talking about promoting comprehension of text. So, what I'm going to be doing the rest of my time this morning is I'm going to identify the major approaches for conducting classroom discussions about text. That's, if you like, the what works. Then we're going to look at research on those approaches and see what effects they have. Then I'm going to briefly look at the theory, which it tells us why they work. That's the why. And then, most interesting, I think, I'll spend most time on this, I'm going to look at them in practice. I'm going to look at the talk and try and explain what that means under the theme of different talk for different purposes. Okay, so let's get started. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to show you a brief video clip of a discussion in a Year 4 classroom in the United States. And I just want to show you a couple of minutes of this so that we're all on the same page in terms of thinking about classroom discussion. Let me tell you about this text. This is a lovely text called Victor. And the students have just read this text and they're discussing it in a small group. The story is about a young boy called Cody. And Cody is incapacitated, lying in a coma in a hospital bed. And what he does to pass the time is he creates this imaginary world in the ceiling tiles that he can see. That's the only thing he can see, lying in his bed. And he calls this imaginary world that he creates in the ceiling tiles the land above. During his stay in hospital, a mysterious man named Victor comes to visit Cody. He pulls up a chair beside Cody's bed. Cody can't see him because he can't move. And he starts to tell Cody stories about what his life's going to be like when he comes out of the coma. And in this discussion, the teacher and the students are trying to understand who is Victor. Who is Victor? So let's see what they have to say. And let's hope this works. Okay. I've just taken a transcript of that brief segment we looked at, and I won't read this to you in the interest of time, but I just want to point out some features of the talk in that little segment we saw. First of all, we see the teacher asking a question. You think Victor's an angel? Can you tell me why you think so? So here she's asking an authentic question. She's using uptake. She's picking up on what the student has said earlier. And she's provoking, as we can see in the rest of the segment, high-level thinking. That's the HLT up there, high-level thinking about the text. Several students then come up with elaborated explanations. That's the EE, Michelle, and Andrew here. And so you can see, just by looking at the amount of text, these are long, elaborated explanations of why they think the way they think and what they think. We see a lot of references to the text, called RTT. We see the teacher using uptake again, picking up on what one of the students said. We see a student asking a question, and of course it's an authentic question. It involves uptake, and it provokes high-level thinking, and that continues. And a very interesting thing happens in this segment is that right here, after the teacher asks that first question, we see an extended episode of student talk, briefly interrupted by the teacher, just saying that was interesting. But this is a segment of talk that many of you will recognize as exploratory talk. Here the students are collectively trying to figure out what's going on here. How can they make sense of this? They're working together collectively, thinking together, interthinking, to try and work out what's going on. Now, their thinking is inchoate, it's not fully developed. That's fine, that's exploratory talk. We're trying to explore what's going on here. And that exploratory talk is good collective reasoning that we like to see in these sorts of discussions. So I'm going to come back to those features in a little bit. Let me just summarize them for you. So when we're talking about quality talk, we're talking about authentic questions, uptake, high-level thinking questions, a few questions I didn't tell you about, effective response questions, making connection between the text and your own life and experience, intertextual reference questions, making connections between texts, shared knowledge questions, making connections to previous discussions or lessons you've had with the class, elaborate explanations, exploratory talk, reasoning words in context. I should have mentioned that. But here we see words like I think, because, maybe, cause, maybe, reason, I don't think, because, evidence, could, how. So, those are all good indicators that there's something good going on in this talk. We call those reasoning words. And reference to text. All right. So, I promised to tell you what we found to be the major approaches to conducting classroom discussions about text. And some years ago now, my colleagues and I identified 9 major approaches to conducting discussions about text. And we call these the Big 9. Some of them you'll recognize. We did not mean to be US-centric. We didn't think about that. But I suspect, being in the United States, we were. Book club, literature circles, grand conversations, instructional conversations, questioning the author, junior grade books, shared inquiry, collaborative reasoning, idea seminars, philosophy for children. Those we identified as the Big 9. Now there are lots of other approaches, and there are approaches you yourself will come up with. That's fine. What's special, we think, about these 9 is that they have a good track record of empirical research supporting them, and they have some consistency of application. They look the same. from one place to the next, from one time to the next. You know, still being responsive to students, but they have some consistency in what they look like. So, let's look at what the research says about those big 9 approaches. What effects do they have? Back in 2009, some colleagues and I did a meta-analysis, and we looked at all of the studies on these approaches, and this is what we found. And some of you may know John Hattie from Melbourne, and one of the things that I learned from John, probably the only thing I learned from John, is that these are effect sizes. And an effect size of 0.4 or greater than 0.4, is worth writing home about. If you see an effect size above 0.4, you know there's something interesting happening. So what do we see going on here? Well, predictably, so what we've got over here is the acronyms for the approaches, those 9 approaches here. And here, across this row, we've got different outcomes that were measured in these studies. So what we see, typically, is huge increases in student talk and commensurate decreases in teacher talk. That's the negatives, here, and here, and here. So big increases in student talk, decreases in teacher talk. That's great, that's what we expect to see. But really what was interesting when we did this, and looking back at this work, is that, some of the approaches are good at increasing general garden variety comprehension. Some of the approaches are good at improving text explicit comprehension, comprehension of the details explicitly stated in the text. Some of the approaches are good at promoting text implicit comprehension, where the students have to make inferences to connect parts of the text together. Some of the approaches are good at promoting scriptally implicit comprehension, where students have to make heavy use of their background knowledge to make high-level inferences about the text. Some of the approaches are good at promoting metacognition, this one, and some approaches are even good at promoting critical thinking and reasoning. So what's interesting here, and you've probably seen this already, is it seems, just by looking at the research, different talk serves different purposes. The talk seems to do different things. Some approaches are good for some things, some are good for others. So that's the research. Let's look at the theory behind some of those approaches. And I won't go through all of them, that would be pretty dull. Let me just look at a couple of them, 3 of them. And first of all, let's look at the theory as to why we think book club discussions work. And what I did a few years ago with a doctoral student is we read everything about book club, and we looked to see how often various proponents of book club cited different theorists and the constructs that they were using to explain why book club works. And we came up with a count to show us the dominant theoretical constructs that are being used to explain the beauty of book club. And when we looked at book club, far and away, the most common explanation for why book club work is a Vygotskian explanation. This is the idea that language is a tool for thought, and that in discussion, students internalize ways of thinking about the text from their teacher, from other students. They internalize those ways of thinking, they make them their own, so they can apply them independently with new texts and new tasks. That was book club. Grand conversations, yes, there's some Vygotskian explanations for grand conversations, but the dominant theory as to why grand conversations work is what we call reader response theory. And this is simply the idea that the talk enables students to make personal connections to the text, and that those connections enable them to gain a deeper level of understanding and interpretation of the text. And then we had Question the Author, the last one I'll show you under this heading of theory. And in Question the Author, the explanation as to why the talk in Question the Author works is entirely cognitive, basically. As far as Question the Author people are concerned, the reason why that approach to talk works is that the talk fosters deep engagement with the text. It helps students activate their background knowledge relevant to the text. Helps them make the necessary inferences to construct a coherent interpretation of the text. So this is interesting. Even just by looking at the theory, we get the impression that the talk does different things. Different talk for different purposes. Okay. I don't know whether this is a protocol or whatever. Does anyone have any questions before I keep going? Everyone go? Okay. So, let's go to the most interesting part of it for me, is practice. What do these approaches look like in practice? What does the talk look like in these discussions? Let's have a look at what the talk looks like in these discussions. And what I'm going to do is look at the talk in book club. And I'm going to show you a transcript. It's a transcript from a small group of Year 4 students, Year 4 and Year 5 students, and they're discussing a story called Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. And this story is about a 13-year-old girl called Sal, and she's taking a cross-country trip with her grandparents. And in this little excerpt that they read, the students are discussing Sal's reminiscence of the time her grandparents were in Washington, D.C. And when her grandparents were in Washington, D.C., they got 2 flat tires on their car, and they were arrested for stealing emergency tires from a US senator's car. So, the line of text that the students were focused on is the grandfather's recollection of the event. And his recollection was, we were only borrowing the senator's tires, we were going to return them. So this is what they say in this little small group discussion about this text. 2, how are they crazy? Authentic question, uptake, promoting high-level thinking. Andy, of course they're crazy, because only crazy persons are going to rob tires from a senator. 2, they didn't rob it. Andy, yes they did, they stole them. 2, they borrowed it from them. Andy, so they stole them. Long, that's kind of borrowing. Andy, so I go and steal some kids' video games and I'm just borrowing them? 2, to them, the grandparents, they are borrowed. And to other people, they are stealing. Now, the first thing I noticed when I saw this transcript is how short the students' responses are. They're quite short. Quite sparse, actually. But there's an interesting aspect to this transcript in that after 2 ask that question, there's an episode of exploratory talk. It's not fantastic exploratory talk, they could be giving more reasons for their thinking, but it's exploratory talk all the same. They're trying to puzzle this out together and figure out how to interpret what the grandparents did. So, there's some merit to this discussion. And the interesting thing to know about book club is that the teacher is not there. This is a peer-led discussion. There's no teacher, and hence, if there's no teacher, you're more likely to get these extended episodes of student talk, exploratory talk. Let's look at grand conversations. I'll tell you about this transcript. Here we've got a teacher and a small group of Year 3 students, and they're discussing a story, Sarah Plain and Tall by Patricia McLaughlin. And the story is about a farmer in the American Midwest during the late 19th century. And the farmer is a widower and the father of 2 young children. He finds it hard to run the farm and the household without a wife, so he puts an advertisement in the East Coast newspaper for a mail or a bride. And Sarah is the woman who answers the ad. The story picks up on her arrival at the farm for a trial period, and in this excerpt that they read, the teacher and the students are discussing Sarah's reaction to the first storm she experiences in the Midwest. And let's see what happens. Kara. Sarah is very frightened, and Caleb was. It was a scary moment. Teacher. Why do you think Sarah might be more upset than Jacob during the storm? What do we know about the characters? Authentic question, I'll take part of your thinking. Chris, because she's a girl and she might get more scared. I didn't write this, is what I said. Teacher, so you think a girl could get more scared? That's one idea. Michelle, maybe she wasn't used to that kind of storm. Teacher, did she ever mention that kind of storm where she's from? That's another idea. Talia. And Talia is actually pushing against what Chris said. Well, Sarah was very brave when she went out to the storm. Chris. She is real brave at the part with the buzzards around the lamb that was dead. She tried to go in and scare them all off. If they get really mad, they could tear you all up. Michelle says, when Jacob said, I've got to fix the roof, she said, no, we've got to, because she didn't want to feel too left out and too girlish to stay inside and to take care of the kids and stuff. She wanted to try to get some action and do other things sort of dangerous. She could have fallen from the roof. Now, let's look at this transcript. Yes, there's a good teacher question. The teacher's present, obviously, in this discussion, quite present. But what I think is interesting in this little segment is that we have two long, elaborated explanations of thinking. One from Chris and one from Michelle. Two good, elaborated explanations. Two good instances of individual, high-level reasoning going on in this segment. No episodes of exploratory talk. Why? The teacher is very present in this discussion. We'll come back to that later. And thirdly, let's look at idea seminar. A long text, I'll read it, but let me set it up. This is a idea seminar. The teacher's conducting a whole class discussion. It's with a group of Year 9 students, and they're discussing the preamble to the US Constitution. Before the discussion, what the teacher had done is she prompted the students to identify a single concept in the preamble to the Constitution that was most important in a democracy. Things like we the people, or justice, or union, or common defense. And the teacher posed the question, why is the concept, the students had chose, why is the concept the most important to democracy? And this is what happened. Jeremy, it's like no one of these equals a democracy. It's as if you had, say, domestic tranquility. Tranquility could exist under a dictator. That one element alone doesn't make a democracy. Maria, I think I see what Jeremy means. We could provide for the common defense with a military government. Maybe even better than with a democracy. So it takes all of these working together to produce democracy. Teacher, okay, but how? Look at the concepts that Janine listed on the board earlier. 8 ideas. My question is, how are they related to each other? Monty, for one thing, liberty and justice are related. Teacher, how? Monty, a strong justice system protects us from each other. It's what keeps us from beating each other up in the halls, stealing from each other. It's what keeps me from taking someone else's liberty away. Juanita, or someone else from taking yours. Exactly, said Monty. George, it's as if in a democracy we're all connected somehow. What's good for you is also good for me. Janine, is that why 9 of us voted for we the people as the most important concept in the whole thing? William, has to be. I voted for it originally, but I was never able to explain why. It's strange, but none of these concepts work if we're at war with each other. It's only when we work collaboratively that any of these ideas have a chance. Juanita, yeah, look at the board. Union, common defense. It's like the theme of the whole preamble is that somehow we are all tied together. Teacher, look back at the preamble to see if what you do is right. Is unity a common theme? So we've got some powerful thinking going on in this little segment here. And what's interesting is that we have several instances of elaborated explanations. Right here with Maria, another one with Monty, and another one with William. Lots of good individual reasoning, high-level reasoning going on in that segment. But in that segment, we've also got an extended episode of, it's not quite exploratory talk, it's more cumulative talk, CT. But it's productive cumulative talk. The students aren't disagreeing with each other so much as building off each other. So we call that more cumulative than exploratory. But it's very productive cumulative talk. So what's happening here? In book club, peer-led discussion, we see some exploratory talk. In camp conversations, we don't see any exploratory talk, but we see good individual reasoning because the teacher is present and doing a lot of the work. And in Ideas Seminar, we see both elaborate explanations and exploratory talk. So what's happening in these discussions is that the talk seems to be doing different things. The talk is serving different purposes. Some talk promotes individual reasoning, some promotes collective reasoning, and some talk seems to do both. Again, different talk is serving different purposes. Okay. I'm going to move on now to a more speculative part of my talk, and moving away from those approaches I just talked about. And a very hot topic around the world right now, and in the United States, in Europe, in Israel, a lot of people are worrying about argumentation and how can we help students engage in productive argumentation. And why is this such a hot topic? Well, the theory is that helping students to argue is a good thing in its own right, because if they can learn to argue, they can learn to search for, quote, the truth, they can identify bias, and rule out fake news. Something that would be a bad idea, actually. We also think that arguing, productive argumentation, is a good way of learning material. So, learning to argue or arguing to learn, either way, we think there are good things about this. So a lot of research is going on about how to engage students in productive argumentation, and this is what I'll be talking about in my workshop later on today. Problem is, which type of talk would be most suited to promoting productive argumentation? Some people think that inquiry dialogue, it's a type of dialogue that a philosopher of education, Douglas Walton, identified. Some people think that talk called inquiry dialogue would be best for promoting productive argumentation, rigorous collaborative argumentation. And so I'm going to show you a clip of some inquiry dialogue. And in this clip, it's a group of Year 5 students. By the way, this is work I did with a colleague, Alina Osinskaya. And in this segment, the students are discussing a lovely story. It's about two little girls in a class, and the teachers organised an art competition. And Evelyn is probably the best painter in the entire school, and she enters the competition. Kelly is maybe not the best painter in the school, but she's very keen to enter the competition and win the prize. On the day of the competition, Evelyn comes to school with her painting. It's an amazing painting, and she puts it by the wall outside in the playground. The school starts. Kelly is inside the classroom. She sees that Evelyn has left her painting outside. Should she tell Evelyn that she left the painting outside? If she does, she's probably going to lose the contest. If she doesn't, even more serious, it's starting to rain. Evelyn's painting, as beautiful as it is going to get ruined. So the big question the students are discussing, what should Kelly do in this scenario? So let's see what the students say in this segment of inquiry dialogue. What do we see happening here in this inquiry dialogue? Notice that the students and the teacher are all working together to work out the most reasonable answer to the big contestable question, what should Kelly do? They're working together collectively to come up with the most reasonable answer to the question. And you'll notice that the teacher and the students use the pronoun we a lot. We're saying, what position are we connecting to? They're working as a community of inquiry. They're working together to figure out the best, most reasonable answer to the question. It's very much a joint effort. So maybe inquiry dialogue is the best way to promote productive argumentation. But some people think that no, it's not so much inquiry dialogue, it's persuasion dialogue. And here I've got a little excerpt, I don't have a video clip, from a study that some other people conducted. And this is an excerpt from a year 6 history classroom. Before the discussion took place, students had read several sources about immigration to America in the early 20th century, and they were assigned to represent opposing points of view of immigrants versus nativists. And they were asked to debate each other, and so we're going to see a debate here. And I'm just going to read this for you. Arnie, us nativists think you should go back to where you came from because you are going to take over the country. Ariel, how are we going to do that? Arnie, because more and more immigrants are going to keep coming, and then next thing you know, there's going to be more immigrants than nativists. Wendy, it's supposed to be a free country. Greg, I know that some immigrants come to America, and when voting time comes, you all vote for what's best for you all, not what's best for the country. Wendy, how can you say that when you don't know how we feel? Arnie, because you don't know anything about our country. Greg, you just come to America and learning English, and you might not know how the things are running, and you are just picking names, and you vote for that person. Wendy, but you don't own it, you don't own this country. Arnie, technically we do, because we were born here. Pretty topical, isn't it? This is persuasion dialogue. Students are engaging in a debate, and it's a type of talk aimed at winning over an opponent. Is this the best type of talk to use to promote productive argumentation? We're not sure. It might be that they actually work in different ways. Maybe inquiry dialogue is promoting good understanding of content, and it might be that persuasion dialogue debate is good for learning about argumentation and how to argue. We don't know, and no one knows, to the best of my knowledge. And my colleagues and I just submitted a big grant proposal to try and figure this out. There's probably some affordances and constraints of both types of talk, but we just don't know what they are yet. So that's a bit speculative. Either way, we're pretty confident that these different types of talk serve different purposes, and we need to figure out what those purposes are. Alright, so this comes to the so what part of the talk. What's the big deal? Why should we even care about any of this? Well, I think the message here is pretty simple. We need to be a little bit more strategic in the way we have students talk about text. We need to be mindful of what the talk is doing and not doing. Let's try to draw from this notion of a repertoire of approaches to talk about text. You don't have to buy into any of those 9 approaches I put up. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that there are different ways we can engage students in talk. And we need to be mindful of those different ways and draw from them strategically depending on what we want to achieve. This goes back to this notion of dialogic teaching a la Robin Alexander and what Gordon Wells said. And finally, and I think this is the most important thing actually, we need to let's develop an ear for talk. Is that me? Okay. So we need to help develop an ear for talk. As teachers, we need to know what the talk is doing, when it's going awry, and what we can do to keep things on track and if things are going awry. So we need to know when quality talk's happening, what it's good for, and how to promote it. And only by having an ear for what's going on in the classroom, in terms of the nature of the talk, can we do that. All right, so I'm going to finish up just a few references. Last year, a doctoral student and I published a little very short piece in the Reading Teacher called Instructional Frameworks, the quality talk about text, choosing the best approach. And it's really about the topic of this talk. It talks about the 9 approaches and gives little excerpts of the talk, and it's very short and easy to read. I wanted to plug 2 books published through Peter, and I know they helped bring me here, so I thought this was a good thing to do. But these are amazing books. I just read The Becoming a Meaning Maker on a plane yesterday by Christine Edwards-Groves and Christina Davidson. And there's also an earlier one with Christine Edwards-Groves, Michelle Lansky, and Jeff Ball, Classroom Talk, Understanding Dialogue, Pedagogy Practice. I saw these downstairs this morning. These are really good. The scholarship underlying these books is spot on. It's exactly what we need to be thinking about. And I'm very impressed, so I want to encourage you to listen to this. Alina and I just came out with a book in November called The Most Reasonable Answer, helping students build better arguments together. And that's all about inquiry dialogue. And I'll be talking about that later on today in a workshop session. Thanks very much.